what do you make of the last 1,000 to 2,000 years? As
Of
far
our
as
history?
yeah, so you have the fall of Jerusalem, then you have there's the persecution period, then there's the Roman Church development, then you have the fall of Rome, then you have the Roman Catholic Church, which basically rules the world for a good 800 years or so, 1,200 years. I don't know. And then you have the fall of the Roman Church, and you have the Age of Reason and Enlightenment. And a strange conclusion that I've come to is that the Roman Church would have never lost their grip over the world had it not been for the secret societies. The secret societies caused the papacy to lose its power, and then now you have the Industrial Revolution, and then technology. So what's been going on these last 2,000 years? Like, if all of this stuff in Revelation is yet to be, then what was all of this? And then why did Rome lose its grip? Well, see, what I'm saying is it lost its grip in the sense that it had people in their hands, to the masses, to where you can't learn, you can't read. It was spiritual despotism. Like, they had everybody eating out of the palm of their hand. Like, I'm talking about the individuals throughout the world.
I think you're just,
and like he said, people were trying to preserve like geometry and
hey Mike, you're breaking up really bad.
Did lose a big.
I don't know if you can hear me, but we're really struggling to hear your sentences. Sorry, brother. I think
whatever you did get out of it, can you answer it?
Yeah. Well, I think there's an assumption being made, for one, and that is what you said, that Rome had such a tight-fisted control over the entirety of the world. We do have this documentation of persecution of believers, and that Rome was a dominant empire to about the 6th century, and then it split off with Constantinople becoming a new capital and different things like that. And that ruled for another almost 1,000 years as the Eastern Empire of Rome. But what people seem to forget is that all the South American tribes that were across the ocean flourishing and doing their thing, not controlled by Rome, all the Chinese people, Korean, Japanese, Mongols, people in India, not controlled by Rome during those time periods.
Muslims.
Like, these are billions of people over all that time, that, and the Muslim nations as they've merged. So I think there's respectfully, I think there's a big assumption in what you're saying as far as the power and the scope of the power you're giving to the Catholic Church. That's why I've been trying to save this whole night about the idea of Babylon as an empire that influences a lot of nations. But even like I said earlier, Babylon, the leaders of China and Japan in ancient days have enforced the same idolatrous practices onto their people, but they were never under the control of the Babylonian Empire, as far as I understand. But they were in trade with them, and they agreed with how the Babylonian Empire subjugated their subjects in their provinces.
Have you seen what
Go ahead.
My bad. Have you seen what 2nd Ezra 15 says about Asia?
Go ahead. Well, you remember Asia was also called Turkey before.
Oh, really?
Yeah, okay. Before the Asian continent was relabeled by the West.
It was just
Asia Minor over time as well.
Okay. Yeah, verse 46 says in 2nd Ezra 15, "You, Asia, who share in the splendor of Babylon and the glory of her person, woe to you, miserable wretch, for you have made yourself like her. You've decked out your daughters for prostitution to please and glory in your lovers."
Yeah.
Glory of her person.
Like I said, the practices have been in all these quote unquote pagan nations, and I hate to use that word because I think the Catholic Church kind of pushed that word, but these nations that were not in covenant with Yahweh. So they're not doing the behavior of Yahweh. They're not doing this covenant behavior. They're not trying to keep the commandments. They're not trying to, do all the things expounded upon in the scriptures as far as what is good moral behavior in a society. Instead, they're doing all this idolatrous worship that goes with these horrific practices that we can see documented in history by all these ancient nations throughout time as they did idol worship. it was synonymous throughout the world. That doesn't mean that all those different nations were a part of the Babylon, specifically the Babylonian Empire, throughout all those times. If that makes any sense.
Something about
you you believe that these 2,000 years though is basically just set up, right? Like there's been no fulfilled prophecy within the last 2,000 years. All it is basically setting up for Babylon.
Well, let me
the world.
Let me ask you, what prophecy do you think has been fulfilled in the last 2,000 years?
I don't know. I look at the history, from Christ and I examine all of the things that have taken place, and there's some very curious and peculiar changes that have taken place on the world in the last 2,000 years. And I just, in America being a big one, like this whole idea of democracy, and, what does that mean as far as biblical? Like, is that a part of biblical prophecy? Is that a part of the timeline? Is that a part of, is democracy just an evolved form of the original Babylon? Because I don't know much about. But if you think about it, though,
like rehash of the Greek city-states,
right? So I don't know much about Persia, but I know that Babylon was communism. And then I don't know much, like I said, I don't know much about the Medo-Persia Empire. But then you have the Greek, which was a
city-state.
Democratic ideas started to form, and then have Rome, which was like a combination of an emperor, but also a senate to check them, right? So then you have real democracy starting to form, and then now, fast forward, 1,500 years or whatever, you have this new idea of democracy, like an evolved form of it.
Well, if I may, so we don't get lost in semantics. Democracy is technically not what we are. We're a representative republic, and there is a lexiconical definitional difference to that. And so we have democratic ideals and values, but technically, as supposedly the Constitution was supposed to be carried out, be a representative republic. So I was a civics nerd in school.
Democracy meaning mob rules, 51% can override 49%, whereas we have representational government or a democratic republic where we elect people to take care of things for us, hypothetically.
Yeah, to answer your question in a broad stroke, I think what happened in the past 2,000 years is what we've seen is in a macrocosm, what we're seeing in a microcosm example, what's been happening in China since 1950s. And China has been figuring out a way to enforce communism rule, but allow the people to actually have a system of trade and free exchange where they have a semblance
free enterprise
of a democratic free enterprise economy, which will allow them to actually sustain themselves. They learned the lesson of Russia, which self-imploded economically. And so they still have a communism, but they're allowing, we need to let these people give some hope and work and make some profits. We can't just be taking everything like the Russians did. And, history of Russia is horrible, man. They were just, they literally chewed off their own legs. It's crazy. So I think what was happening over these last 2,000 years is, as Christianity, as the belief in Yeshua was flourishing like wildfire from Britain all the way to India and being passed around everywhere, and believers were springing up in great numbers, that it was causing destabilization to empiric concepts. This is just like we see. Well, I'm not. That's too deep. Let me go. And I'm not saying you couldn't handle it. I just don't want to get lost. I don't want the audience to get lost. So let me say it like this. So it's twofold. We have believers. I truly believe that Yeshua changed the game when he resurrected and ascended to his priesthood, as the scriptures talk about. He ministers in the temple on our behalf, and through his priesthood, he has access to the Spirit of God, unlike any other priest of Israel ever. So he can give it as he wills. This is what Peter tries to explain in Acts chapter 2, verse 32 through 35. And as a result of that, he now, even though there's no temple in Jerusalem anymore, believers could be spread out all across the world and still receive the power of God given to them in in a wonderful benevolent exchange of faith receiving favor, faith receiving grace through Yeshua's priesthood, and he gives you that power so that you can, be effective in your life and walk out righteous behavior. No matter where you are in the earth at all times, like it's this beautiful exchange that we have greater access to the throne room through Yeshua than we've ever had in Israel, right? What's cool about that is that that was flourishing in great numbers quickly as the Roman Empire was having some issues. It was struggling to keep its power over the people. Obviously, you just referenced earlier in AD 70, the Great Rebellion in Jerusalem, to which they came in and squashed everybody, okay? That also happened with the Huns and with, all these other people in different regions they were struggling to control or invade and enforce their will upon. And so their empire as it was could not be managed. It was too big, it broken up. So they, just like China, had to take someone else's failure and learn. The kings of the earth, the Vatican, and everyone that was ruling the empire of Babylon had to realize, all right, well, it's just not feasible for us to literally force everybody across all these different regions of country and culture to do exactly what we want. We'll let them flourish in their own lands, but we'll keep pushing the social degradation appropriated into their own cultures so that they're easier to rule, and we'll just rule them in the same way that they've ruled everybody, right? Which is they get you to transgress the covenant of Yah. They get you to do opposite behavior, destructive behavior, which makes you morally weak. It makes you psychologically weak. It makes your, if you want to go into the, the magnetic field your body puts off, it makes you weak in every regard when you do this destructive, sinful behavior. And therefore you're more easily subjective to oppression and control, no matter who is over you, whether it's a senator from Missouri or whether it's, form of a Gandhi in India. It doesn't matter, because you're not doing covenant behavior that leads to life and strength. So what I'm saying is, I don't think the last 2,000 years was just some weird moment in time that the enemy didn't know what to do. No, I think there's two things happening. The enemy is desperately trying to learn, how do we subjugate mankind with all these different cultures and not lose power, but yet let them think, that famous movie from the 80s, right? How do we let them be imprisoned in their own cities and not let them realize it, right? They've been trying to figure out how they can master that form of oppression. Meanwhile, we've got the idea of people that are breaking out of that behavior because they have a greater, quicker access to the Spirit of God through Yeshua's priesthood is also operating at the same time, which constantly thwarts these plans. Does that make sense? So you have 2,000 years of the Father, which is called the time of the Gentiles, bringing in all these, non-blood born, and even in faith in Yeshua, there's no Greek, there's no Jew. I understand that. I'm just trying to expound upon this idea of what's happening at the same time that Rome is restructuring, trying to figure out better ways to manipulate, control people throughout their own cultures. You have God working on the earth, and he's throughout all these nations, bringing in believers in masses everywhere, to even the Native Americans in what is now the United States, happening during the same time. My ancestors, the Chickasaws and the Cherokees. So this is where you have two things happen at the same time. It's a battle of the kingdoms. I'm going to talk about this in part 21. So ultimately, the last 2,000 years has been the time of the Gentiles, and when the nations, which is what the word Gentiles means, when that has been fulfilled and all of them are coming in, this is when you're going to have all these events in Revelation to start to actually happen.
What verse is that from? The time of the Gentiles? Yeah, let me yeah, I want to hear that.
Chat is going crazy about the Trinity debate.
Oh man, the chat was talking about all kinds of things, not what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
There's a mention of it in Luke 21:24. It's about they shall fall by the edge of the sword, shall be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And so this is Luke 21:24. I personally believe it is talking about the AD 70 fall of Jerusalem. That's when Jerusalem's destroyed, trodden down, they're dispersed into all the nations. And then that kicks off this time of the Gentiles until that's fulfilled, and that's when Yeshua returns. So, I mean, that's getting us to the point of when Revelation starts. basically. And this is, I think, the same thing I was trying to say on Jason's broadcast a couple weeks back. Just say that I don't think that Revelation has actually started yet. I mean, the first 3 chapters are letters to different churches in Asia Minor. So that's kind of independent of the actual visions that start to happen about future events, which starts in chapter 4, leading up to chapter 22. I'm sorry, Marlo's trying to get back in. Hey, brother Marlo, thanks for coming back, man.
There he is.
I had to restart my whole situation, man.
Oh,
How much did I miss? I missed a whole bunch, huh? Y'all probably talking about something completely different.
Mike just asked me to recap the last 2,000 years of prophecy.
Can you repeat it? No,
he's asking those tough questions tonight.